I create new videos each week, so don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. So how do you make your old beat up drum set go from looking like this to looking like this, and doing it without breaking the bank? Well, in this drum restoration video series, I'm answering that question. This video is going to deal with how I applied that lacquer type finish to make these drums look shiny and brand new. That's what's up next, so check it out. In the previous two videos, I talked about how I applied the stain to the drum set and how I updated the hardware. This video is part 3, so if you haven't checked out parts 1 and part 2, you'll find the link down in the description. Okay, so here we are with finishing this drum. The stain has now cured, it's been sitting there for a few days. Now I didn't end up going with lacquer. I ended up using some simple wipe-on polyurethane that I bought from Home Depot. Let's go ahead and start adding some poly to this shell. Now the first thing I did to get this drum ready for finishing is trying to get rid of the dust. I'm using microfiber cloth and I'm spraying on some mineral spirits. And the mineral spirits is better for working inside of an oil base. If you're using a water-based stain, then you could use some soapy water and that does pretty much the same thing. Now, full disclaimer here, I've never done this before. Don't beat me up too much in the comments if I'm doing this all wrong. I'm using this Minwax wipe-on poly. We're gonna see how it works. So I'm gonna do this with a foam roller. I have some Minwax here inside of this little jar. I'm gonna try to coat the roller and give it a shot. Let's see how we do. So after one coat, the grain is definitely popping. It really looks good, but let's let it dry, give it a little wet sand and see how we do. Okay, so here we are the next day, and I've already applied 3 coats to these toms, 2 coats to the bass drum, and I'm just about to apply the 4th coat, but I wanted to take some time to show you the process of what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is I'm wet sanding these in between coats. So this is 400 grit sandpaper, and what I'm doing is I'm taking some mineral spirits in a squirter bottle, just like this. Now you could squirt this right up to the shell, just make sure you hold it far back, and just give it a little fine mist, like that. It doesn't have to be super saturated, but I already have a cloth that's pretty wet right now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and spread that across the shell. Okay, now I have a sanding block that's kind of spongy, and I'm just going to wrap that with the 400 grit. Okay, now when I sand this, I'm being super gentle. I'm not sanding super hard, I don't want to take off the finish. I just want to file down any kind of bubbles. Very lightly moving across the shell. I'm putting no pressure on this shell. I'm just letting the sandpaper sit on top and file it down. Just very lightly. Now I'm just going to wipe off all of that sandpaper dust. Okay, so we're back, and I've done 5 coats on each of these drums, and I'm getting ready to put the 6th one on. Same process, wash, rinse, repeat. You're just going to sit there, sand it down from the last coat very, very lightly. Then I wipe it down with mineral spirits, very, very light coating, and we go ahead and add another coat of urethane. So So if we take a look at coat number 6 here, you can see we have a pretty good shine. The wood grain's really popping. This mid-wax rub-on poly is doing a really nice job. And just to give you an idea, here's the 12-inch tom. You can see how it's looking. So far, I'm super happy with the results. I really wanted to get that wood grain to pop out, and I kind of wanted to preserve all the road damage. There's some nicks and scratches that are now kind of set into the finish, which I think gives the drum a lot of character. Okay, here we are, the final coat, the last one, and this is the one that's been the trickiest because up until now, if I've made any kind of mistakes with little nibs or little runs or whatnot, I could just sand it down and add the second coat and it covers it up. But the final coat, you want to kind of leave it alone. So I've been kind of experimenting and I've made a couple of mistakes, but I think I figured out a solution that's going to work. So basically what I've done is I've got the second to last coat pretty clean as I can get it. Now again, there's always going to be little nibs and little dust bubbles and whatnot unless you're in a crazy studio with zero dust. So my solution was to actually take a tiny little square of 400 grit sandpaper. I put on a little roll of tape and attached it to my finger. I went onto the drum with a light and I looked for every little inconsistency I could find, every little bubble, every little bump, and I just sanded it out very gently with the 400 grit. Then I would take the 4X steel wool and just kind of rub it out a little bit, make it nice and even. So there's all little spots all over the drum where I've done that. Mineral spirits is great on the oil-based stuff because it dries out real quick. But now there's going to be a little gray area. There's going to be a little sanded down spot. For the final coat, I'd like this coat to be as perfect as I can make it before I go ahead and start trying to polish these drums. My plan is to still roll on the last coat, not too thick, but then instead of going through it with the brush, working at the bubbles, I'm just going to very lightly work it in with some cotton rags. This is just an ordinary white cotton t-shirt. I fold it into a square. I've wet it down with some mineral spirits. Not really going for coverage or buildup here. I'm just going for a super thin coat to clean up all those little imperfections that I sanded and fixed. Now, I've already done it on this drum. This drum came out great. Let's try it on this drum so you can see exactly what I'm doing. This is the final coat. This was the hardest part, honestly, to get this right, and I've messed it up and had to sand down and start over a couple of times. So hopefully this is my last one. Make sure you mix your poly. They say this on every video, to mix the poly. A warning, I didn't heat enough. Try to work as many of the bubbles as I can, although I'm not super concerned with bubbles. You just got to work them out. And I'm just going to roll this on the same way I've been doing. Now, if you notice, I left the other drum on here. I find that as I'm rolling one drum, the other drum's drying, and when you roll it like this, again, it kind of flattens out the finish, avoiding any kind of runs. Although this is such a thin layer, I can't imagine there's going to be any kind of runs. But you do want to get this on here fast because it cures pretty quickly, and you want it to be wet. Okay, notice I'm just getting this on the drum. Now, I'm not applying any pressure when I do this. I'm just letting the rag go over the surface, just like I was doing before with the brush. But this time I don't care if I'm wiping off the poly a little bit. I kind of want to absorb it a little bit, make sure there's no bubbles. Okay, notice this time I went pretty fast. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start back at the beginning and I'm going to go through it slow. Try to get it nice and even as possible. This is our final coat and I don't want to sand it. I'm just going to go through, look for any bubbles that I might have missed. And again, there's still a couple of pieces of dust, and unless you're in a super dust-free environment, you're not going to get rid of that. But hopefully when I go to shine these up, it'll remove those little imperfections. So far this is looking great. I'm not catching any bubbles or anything in here. Like I said, it's a little bit of dust that you can see in the light. Normally I've been letting this dry for about 3 hours and then applying the next coat. This is a super thin coat, but I want to really let it dry because the next step is going to be buffing and shining it up. And that's going to be our finished drums. Okay, so that's going to wrap up part 3 where we added the polyurethane finish. The next step is to polish that finish out to a high shine. Now, I chose a satin finish, so it's not going to be as shiny as like a gloss finish, but for my purpose of video, I didn't want a super shiny finish that's going to reflect all my studio lights and whatnot. Again, don't forget to subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you dug this video, do me a favor, throw it a like. Thanks again for checking it out. I'll see you over on part 4.